Mixed farm. My father mostly was suckler cows and beef finishing, but as normally there was a field of potatoes put in, and there was also turnips. And where the potatoes were, there was always a couple of drills left for vegetables. And even from primary school age, I don't ever remember a time whenever we didn't have beans and peas, loads of cabbages, and there had been other vegetables as well. Probably carrots would have been another popular one. And for anyone who's watching tonight and you're a certain age like myself, the seeds came home out of a certain hardware shop in Ballynahinch in little brown packets. So that was where the interest in growing really came from. And then whenever I got married, if anybody's wondering where these herbs are growing, I'm about half a mile from the Silent Valley on the Head Road. So we get quite a bit of wind, and it's not always the easiest place to grow, but I do seem to manage all right. So that's where I am, and that's where the herbs are. But whenever we married, Sam was still doing ware potatoes, and as anyone who's grown potatoes would know, that in between two varieties of potatoes, you had to have a space, and I was allowed to have that space. So that's where I grew my vegetables. And then I started watching Jeff Hamilton in The Gardener's World, and he was growing herbs. And he made it look so easy, and I thought, okay, right, he's growing herbs, I'll have a go at this. So it has been about 25 years ago, Balmoral's show at one of the garden nurseries, they were selling herbs for 50p each. So I thought, okay, let's give it a go. You can't lose much at 50p each. And I came home, I think, with 6 herbs. And some of those first herbs were like sage, thyme, just the normal herbs that anyone would be growing. And that's where I started off, David.
Good work.
But I think we'll go into our first slide now, and I think the first herb that anyone who would know would be parsley. I think it's the one that everyone is most familiar with. And this, of course, is the curly-leafed or moss type of parsley. Now, I'm going to say that if anybody wants to spend time growing parsley, I wouldn't perhaps grow this one, because you can buy this one easily in the supermarket or the garden centre. And I think if you're going to grow something yourself, grow something slightly different. So go for the flat leaf parsley, and it's our second slide. And it has a nice, it has a stronger flavour than what the curly leaf would have. And that is the one that I would try to grow. Again, this is a perfect time of year for us to be talking about herbs, because obviously the weather's improving, the soil's getting warmer, and we're thinking of working in our greenhouses. So this is a good time to sow. Again, with the flat leafed, I would put it in a drill out in the vegetable plot. But again, with the flat leafed or the curly leafed, you can put it in a pot and have it beside your door, because then it means if it's in night time and you're cooking something, you're not tramping to the bottom of the garden to find your herbs. So if it's something that you're using all the time, then keep it near your back door. And if anybody wonders what parsley is good for and why would you bother growing it, now again, I have to put a disclaimer in. All the herbs that I'll be talking about tonight, I treat them as culinary herbs. They're just herbs that I cook with. So in each dish, you're only putting a slight amount. I'm not into medicinal herbs, and I wouldn't be up to recommending what the medicinal purposes are, but I can certainly tell you tonight what they can be used for. But again, I wouldn't be unfamiliar with that, because it can affect different medicines, and different herbs can react in different ways. But if you're thinking of growing parsley, for anyone who suffers from high blood pressure, it can help reduce your blood pressure, inflammatory diseases. And it's also very high in vitamin A and vitamin K, and it's good for your bone health. So there's some reasons why we should be growing our parsley. Now, the next slide is coming up. It's a sorrel. Now, this is a really old herb, and it dates right back to the medieval times. Now, first of all, I'm going to say that this herb, it is a perennial, and you can grow it every year. Now, I had the first lot of sorrel grown for about 10 years in the same spot, and then I realised I needed to refresh it. Now, this is what it looks like. This was only taken, I would say, I think it was Monday evening. I went out around the garden just to take a few photographs. So as you can see, I haven't got any weeding done yet, but that's the stage now that you want to start picking your sorrel. You don't want your leaves to get too hardy or too rough. And keep picking all these herbs that we're talking about tonight, because that keeps them nice and fresh. Because if you let sorrel go to seed, it looks like a docking. And if you've got an enthusiastic gardener with you in the family, they could come along and think, oh, sure, that's just a docking, and out it goes. So the best thing is not to let it go to seed and to keep using it as it is. Now, sorrel, you can find it grown in the hedgerows. It is one of our native plants. But I'm going to put this is really written in capital letters. It is identical to lords and ladies. And that's a plant which grows in our hedgerows along with sorrel. But it is totally poisonous. So I would be against advising anyone to gather their sorrel from the hedgerow. You might think you're gathering sorrel, but I'd be afraid that you're not. So I would always grow the sorrel from a seed packet, and then you're sure what you have. And I see there's a question coming up there. Sorrel does come up every year. I've had it for, this one now is about its 4th year, and it will make a whole drill, so it will, but it does come up. It dies away in the wintertime, but comes again in the spring. Now, some reasons for why you should be growing sorrel. But first of all, I should tell you what the flavour is. It's good in salads, and it has a nice sort of lemony flavour, maybe a slightly bitter lemony flavour, but it's lovely in salads. But you can also add it to soups or to casseroles. It's high in vitamin A, and you can use it to treat fevers or chicken pox or for swellings and inflammatory conditions. So that's some of the things that you can use it for. But again, that's a very useful herb, especially at this time of year when you're in between your winter crops and your annuals haven't come on yet, you haven't sown them. It's a nice herb to start the season with. Our next one is the three-cornered leek. Now, this is the bane of my life. This is a really old native herb, and it's dated back to coming back into Britain about 1759. Whoever brought it in, I don't know, but there's some reason for it. And it is literally called the three-cornered leek because whenever you pick the stem, it has got 3 corners on it. Now, for anyone who lives near the countryside, it is illegal now to plant this herb because it spreads so easily. And if anyone travels between Annalong and Newcastle, they will know that, depending which way you're coming, if you're coming to Kiel, on the road verge on the right-hand side, from about now onwards will be a mass of white. And probably if anyone ever did plant it or where it's self-seeded, it spreads like anything. And it can be, it's totally edible. Now, there's nothing wrong with it that way, but it is such an invasive. We have found it whenever we plant it in the close that I am now digging it out of everywhere. It just spreads and it does become a nuisance. And you wonder to yourself why you did. But at this stage, whenever it's lovely and fresh, it is a beautiful flower on it. And absolutely, the whole thing is totally edible. But if we go on to the next slide, it will show you just how problematic it can become. And that used to be my herb garden at the stable, and it was ideal at one time because it was south facing and it had a slope, but it became too small for what I was growing. But as you can see, that I took that all out as I thought last year, and it has just come back again. So if you've got a neighbour who's maybe a bit irksome, you could give them a little bit of garlic and torment them for the rest of their lives. But really, we shouldn't be planting it outside in the countryside. And the only thing that I can say medicinally is that it can reduce high blood pressure, but I'm not sure whenever you're faced with a garden like that. And underneath all that, believe it or not, there's some beautiful shrubs and flowers. The only good thing about it is that it only lasts in that form for a short time. And whenever you come back in a month's time, all those leaves will just die away very quickly. And maybe that's one of the problems then, because once it dies down, you forget that you have it in the flower bed until it comes up the next spring. So that's one that you can either love it or hate it, but certainly don't put it near any farmer's ground. Now, this is a totally different cattle fish altogether. These are garlic chives. Now, in the winter time, as you can see, I have them in the greenhouse and they're maybe looking a little bit shabby, but that's because they were in a tub also growing with, I'm going to show it later on the photograph and someone can tell me whether it's right or not, but My mother-in-law always told me it was shamrock, but it's very, it does invade in the greenhouse as well, but it's easy sorted. So this is what the garlic chives look like at this time of year. They've survived the winter in the greenhouse. So what I do is I just scrape off the top of that soil, give them fresh compost and give them a feed, and then they'll go outside. And those can be used all the time in salads right through the whole summer. And in the autumn time, they have beautiful white flowers and a really good strong stem. So if anyone's into flower arranging in autumn time, if you're doing arrangement for church harvest, it's a really nice one to have. And again, that one's easy growing, that's perennial. I've had those garlic chives, I've divided them several times, and they're very easy growing. But they do give although they're called garlic chives, they have a milder flavour than what the ordinary garlic would have. So it's a nice in between. It has still the hint of garlic in it, but it's more onto the chives, and it's nicely chopped up in salads. Now, I'm also told that you can plant it close to roses, and it is supposed to keep black fly off your roses, but whether that's right or not, I'm not too sure in that. But it's also, you can treat it as an antibiotic. It's supposed to aid your digestion, and it can reduce blood pressure again. So that's an easy one to grow, and that's garlic chives. And the next one we have is Welsh onion. Now, this one looks rather poor at the minute, but I've had that plant. That plant has to be at least 20 years old, and I never use it because I'm just so proud to have it. And in the autumn time again, or even before the autumn, end of summer, it will put up the most beautiful head of little mini florets, or whatever you like to call it. And it's really nice to have it. If you did want to use it, then you just use it as you would a scallion or a spring onion. It's a nice flavour to have, but that's just because it's a bit unusual, and because the person gave it to me has passed away long since. I like to keep that in memory of him. But that's Welsh onions. And again, if you do want to use them, they are high in vitamin C. So if anybody wants to improve their vitamin C, it's a good one to have. Now this is Lovage, and we're back now to a really old herb. This is one of our natives, and a lot of people probably watching tonight will know it as everlasting celery. And again, that was taken just at the beginning of the week, so it's just starting to come up. It can be very, it can spread an awful lot. I did chop it back, a lot of it last year. And if you don't keep using it whenever it's small, it will get up to the height of maybe 4 foot. And it puts up beautiful big yellow flowers. The whole thing is edible, but if you want to use it just for soups, now's the time. From now on, keep using it and don't let it go to the seed head stage. It does have quite big strong stems, but it is easy chop back. Every so often, whenever I think it's getting too high, or maybe the leaves are getting too hard or too stemmy, I would just come in with the clippers and chop it down, and before you know it, it comes back up again. If anyone was watching Adrian Dunbar and his brilliant coastal trip around Ireland, he did go to Dorina Allen's cookery school, and I did watch her take a bunch of lovage, and whenever she was doing her salad, she chopped it up and added it to it. So it was nice to see the lovage getting a good mention there. And I also believe that lovage was one of the herbs that probably came from Scotland, and I'm going to blame the Ulster Scots for that. Because I keep thinking that whenever we're making soups in the sort of late winter, and now at this time of year, whenever you're getting, there's the end of March, you're getting these lovely new green shoots, making soup. And I think they would have brought that with them, knowing that at least they could make, and it's always been known as Scotch broth. Whenever we were growing up as children, nobody ever said, are you having vegetable soup? It was always known, are you having Scotch broth? And I think maybe that's where one of the definitives is, that it came with the people from Scotland, and that's why it has been called that. But it's also not just good for soups, but you can put it in frittatas, and it's good with eggs and also potato salads. There's also lots of uses for it as well. It aids good kidney health, and it can be used for respiratory disorders, especially if you've got pleurisy. And you think in the winter time, our grannies would have made soup, and they obviously maybe didn't know all the medical stuff behind it, but they knew that if you took soup with all those good vegetables in it, that it did help you. And it's supposed to help arthritis and migraines. But it also, here's one of the, what I've written in the capital letters, if you have blood pressure, do not use. So obviously if you're going to use a lot of lovage, consult your doctor first. But that is a brilliant herb to have. It's so easy. That plant has been there for, coming up maybe 15 years at least. And every so often you can chop a bit off and give it to neighbours or friends because it does spread. And we'll move on to the sage. Now, this was taken last year whenever we had all the beautiful weather. And if you saw this patch this time last year, where the herbs are now, it was just a few stalks of rhubarb, nettles and mint. And of course, whenever we were in furlough with all this extra time at home, and I decided that now was the time to act. So out came the nettles, out came the mint and the rhubarb. There was only a few stalks of rhubarb, it was shifted. And I started then to put my herbs in. And sage, I think, is one of those that everybody has to have. I think at Christmas, obviously, it's nice being able to go out and have your own sage. And again, it comes in many different flavours. That's the common sage there. But in the greenhouse, and I'm sorry I didn't take a photograph of it, I have pineapple sage. Pineapple sage would be a lot milder, but even I do keep it in the greenhouse over winter for I don't think it would last outside, for it's a softer plant than what the common sage is, but it has a lot milder flavour, but the most beautiful soft leaves. That's what I also want to say about herbs tonight. You can't walk past a herb without touching it. It's one of those herbs that you have to touch it, you have to feel it. Even if you're never going to use it, they just have that reaction with us that you have that feel, you want to feel them, you want to smell them, and it's just a lovely plant to have. So it is. Again, now it's easy growing, and it maybe just doesn't like the wind, and if you can find somewhere sheltered, but certainly now over the winter I've had no problem in keeping the common sage outside. You can use it in casseroles, and you can also use it in pork. It's high in vitamin K, and 1 cup of sage tea is a really good antioxidant, and it helps lower cholesterol. But again, if you're going to take a lot of sage made into tea, again, consult your doctor. And a friend and I, for about 20 years, we went around ladies' groups and we did cookery demonstrations. Now, a lot of preparation was done at home, but at the end of the evening, those ladies all had a 3-course meal, a starter, a main course and dessert, all using herbs as ingredients in them. And one of the recipes that we used with sage was pork chops. And what you do is, hopefully I don't bore the men here, but we're going to maybe for the, well, men are good cooks too, we can't say that. Maybe it's just in my house I don't have men that cook. But you get your apples first, you core them, and you make a paste up with butter and sage, and you put that inside your cored apples and cook them in a bain-marie. Then with your pork chops, you just put them in a pan, and you're using about 12 leaves of sage, 12 good leaves, and put 4 of those in your paste inside your apples, and the other 8 go on top of your chops, which you cook in the pan. And that is really, really tasty. So don't just always think that sage is just for using with your turkey at Christmas. There's many other uses for it as well.
Yes, dear.
This is her chives. And again, this picture was taken last year, but I did have a wee look this year. There's obviously weeds in it now, it needs cleared out, but again, a very hardy plant that comes up every year. And I think it has to be also a native because it grows so well in our climate that we don't seem to have any trouble with it. And of course, coming into June time, June, July, it will put up the most beautiful little purple flowers, and they will stay with it right through to the end of the season. And again, it does die down again, but comes up very successfully. And of course, whenever we're making our champ, from now on, we always think that our good potatoes aren't as flowery as what they are, and we tend to start peeling them from now on. And of course, the chives is your natural ingredient to go into champ. And I should just say before we move on in this slide that in the background there, I have feverfew. Now, feverfew isn't an edible plant, it is not a culinary plant, but it is one of those herbs who that would be used for medicinal reasons, and obviously it's meant to reduce fever, But again, it's a popular plant for anyone who does know what they're doing in medical terms. So that's another plant that some people hate and some people love. I love it because A, it self-seeds, so I've no bother with it, and it puts up the most beautifulest white daisy plant, flowers on it. But it does have a peculiar smell. And one of my aunts one time, whenever I planted, she says, "What are you putting that?" And the word she used was stinking. What are you putting that stinking plant in for? But I don't see it as that. I see it as this lovely lime green. It has beautiful white flowers on it. And again, if you're into medicinal knowledge, then you know how to use it as a medicinal herb. And this, I just put this one shot in of what fennel looks like, because you really, well, I would say, I'm going to say you maybe only need one fennel plant, but I think maybe you need two. Because what happens is if you leave that one fennel plant to grow, it'll grow up to maybe 4 or 5 feet, and it'll have beautiful yellow flowers on it. The whole plant is edible, but it means then that you lose maybe some of that lovely green, lush greenery on it for using. So what I would do is let one go so to get the flowers, and the other one I would keep chopping down so that you keep getting a nice fresh green fawns on it. But again, it's easy growing, but wherever you want it to grow, don't try and move it, because it has one big long tap root on it, and once it decides where it's going to grow or where you plant it, then that's best where you leave it. Now, if you let it go to the flower stage, it will self-seed over everywhere, and I've noticed that I have quite a few coming up where I don't want them to be, so I will go out now and pull those out so they don't take over, because it does self-seed. Now this here is wild garlic. Now I'm going to also put on in capital letters, the leaves of the wild garlic are very similar to lily of the valley. There is a road in Mourne, and it's a very narrow road, and I would be on it the odd time. And in the springtime, I've always noticed these broad leaves and the white flowers. And I've always, as I've driven past it, I've always said to myself, oh, that's a clump of wild garlic. But because it's a narrow road and there's coming up in the brow of a hill, I've never actually stopped to investigate, because apparently there's two ways you can tell the difference between wild garlic and lily of the valley. Wild garlic, obviously whenever you split the leaf open, it will smell of garlic, and it will have these clusters of flowers like little stars in a group, and lily of the valley has one single stem with the flowers coming up the whole stem. But if the flower's not on the plant, then please do be very careful that you are pulling wild garlic or lifting wild garlic and not lily of the valley. Again, it's totally edible, and whenever you cook it, it has a lovely mild flavour. Now, I don't have it at home in my own garden, but I do know there are places in Mourne where there is wild garlic, but that's why I'm just mentioning, please do be careful that what you're picking is the right. That's why foraging sometimes isn't always as good as what people say. You have to be very careful. It's also antiviral and antibacterial, so there are good uses for why you should be able to use it, and also for lowering your blood cholesterol. But again, if it's in the wild and the hedgerow, do treat it with caution. Make sure you break the leaf open and check that it is garlic. But a beautiful plant to have, so it is. And now this one now, because I took all the common mint out of the garden, this is the peppermint, and it's in the winter time I keep it in the greenhouse. And again, if you plant it outside, mint will take over, and you'll have it everywhere, and it'll just choke everything up. So tend to put it in a container, although you can really frustrate mint if you put it in a container, because it doesn't want to be in the container to start with. It wants to get its roots out and to run all over the place. And again, mint, if you keep just cutting it down and keeping nice fresh leaves coming on, it can be very useful. And it's very fast growing, so again, that's where it takes over. And it's also brilliant for making mint tea. Do you remember, David, whenever we used to do the afternoon teas? In those days, whenever we were allowed to have groups in together in Tilly's tea room. Myrtle and I would have done afternoon tea, and when they were all finished, we would have made a big saucepan of mint tea and then gave it to the guests just to finish off their tea in a special way. But again, that's a bit of fun, so it is, and there's loads of recipes that you can use your mint in desserts, fruit salads, and chocolate chip cookies. And my favourite way of treating mint is just to get some pears, put them in a saucepan with water, add your mint, and let them simmer so the mint flavour goes into your pears, and it's very tasty afterwards. There are some reasons for using it. It's a calming herb, an upset stomach, and it contains menthol, obviously for a decongestant. A lot of medicines for coughs and stuff would have mint in it, and that's what it looks like close up. But that one there now is the peppermint one, so it is. We're coming on to some of our softer herbs, and these do now. Last summer was absolutely ideal for them because it was so dry, and this year now, with it being wet, I'm not sure how. I think I've lost maybe the time. I'm not sure. It's very hard to tell yet, just to see whether it has survived or not. But usually over the winter time, it's better to take them into the greenhouse. But I did try them outside, and if you do want to keep them outside, then put some gravel around them, and that keeps them from getting japped from whenever the rain falls on them, tries to drain it away from them. And in the second part of that photograph, that is oregano. So it is. But David, maybe you tell us about our new allotment, because I have moved my herb garden from the stable and I'm now in Peggy's allotment. So perhaps you could tell us what the exciting plans are for there.
Yeah, well, about 2 years ago, we applied for some funding to see if we could restore one of the old gardens at the back of one of the cottages, called Peggy's Cottage. We'd always known that it was a good growing wee garden. It was always a hive of activity way back in the early days. So the Halifax Foundation had given us a very nice grant, and we got it all stripped back and started again, and it's all laid out carefully with raised beds, a nice wee tunnel house or garden sheds, and very accessible there for people even with special needs. So very quickly, as soon as we had that finished, Lily was straight in there and had chosen one of the best patches within the herb, within the garden for her herbs. So I didn't argue with her, because sometimes she's a force to be reckoned with, like a second mum. But Lily got all hers sewed out, and really has been very good, because it's quite sheltered in places from the wind, and there's good sunlight getting into it. And we've also there's a wee tin roof sort of comes onto the back of it as well, as we harvest our own rainwater into a water butt, which is always very good for watering. So going forward, if things work out this summer even, we hope to get our garden opened up again to community groups, especially welcoming children and adults with special needs there out, and give them an opportunity to get into the soil and learn all about horticulture and how things were grown, especially in the olden days. But as you can see, Lily here, she's the real expert, and she's always very willing to come along and tell the people that's down there doing their garden if they're doing it right or not. So exciting times ahead, and we're always trying to improve it.
I should say that alongside the herb garden in Hannah's Close, we, whenever we were allowed before it closed down, we would have done soda bread making demonstrations. And whenever our resident baker, Mrs Ruth Hannah, she would do soda bread in the griddle. And thyme is one of the ones that she would use to flavour the soda bread. So we're trying to work together. And well, it was obviously 2 years ago now, we did Taste the Island, and that was showing school children how things were growing, and then obviously then they got to see how the soda bread was made on the griddle. But we worked with 2 primary schools on that project, and we hope that once things get back to normal and we all get vaccinated, that we would be able to welcome school children back to Hannah's Close and to give them the experience of how things are growing, and then it becomes something that you can eat at the end of it all. And just as we're talking there about the second herb on that picture, the oregano, It has beautiful purple flowers. It's a very hardy wee plant, so it is, more so than the thyme. And it's got a strong flavour, but yet it has a sweetness with it. And again, it needs good drainage, so it does. But you can put it really well with tomato dishes. It's good with lamb, chicken, beef, and it adds flavours, especially to bland vegetables like cauliflower. This one here now, it's high in vitamin K. It's an antioxidant, an antibacterial, and it also helps fight viral infections. So that's another nice wee one to have. And we're coming on now to now this is what the margin looked like on Monday evening. As you can see, I'm an avid gardener. The plants have to be hardy to survive at the head road because they do have to fight with the weeds. But hopefully now over Easter we'll get it all sorted. But you can see there, it survived the winter and it's starting to green up beautifully. This would be one of my favourite herbs. One time at the close we had food bloggers and they'd come in from New Zealand, Australia, France, and it was through the local council and Tourism NI that they had come to us. And of course, being from Kilkeel, we had to do a fish dish. And I'm going to show you just how quick this was put together. Ruth was doing bread, obviously, to feature this Irish soda bread. And I nipped down to the fish shop in Kilkeel, literally about an hour before they were due to arrive. So the fish came into the kitchen in Peggy's, and all we did was take the fish, give it a wash, pat it dry, and we put the marjoram. We put a little bit of oil in the tray, the fish next, and then the marjoram on top, covered it with tin foil, and straight into the oven. And that was your main course. And we just served it simply with a salad. But that's some of the ideas. Some people, whenever they grow herbs, they don't know what to use with them. But experiment. Don't be afraid to try different flavours with different things and see how it works out. Again, this is another herb that you have to keep picking. So you want those nice juicy green leaves coming up all the time. And if anybody hasn't ever tried it, what the flavour is, it's like a sweet pine and a citrusy flavour. It really has a flavour all of its own, but it's a super wee herb to have and it'll keep going all summer. Again, a lot of these herbs seem to treat the same ailments. An antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, it treats fungal infections and digestive problems. Now, I'm going to say this, I'm a great fan of European Heritage Day. And although I organise the one, isn't that right, David, on the second Saturday of September, I'm never to be seen. Never there on the second Saturday because I'm away looking at other places that are open. And one year, I was very privileged to go to Grey Abbey, down to the Abbey there, and which of course is in ruins. But there is a fantastic herb garden attached to it. And on that day, the gardener who looks after the herbs, he was there and there was 4 of us and he gave us an excellent tour. And every herb I think that they had there, all were medicinal herbs. And he was quite a character because I think every herb that he had treated every woman's problem that he could come up with. He had a herb there to sort it out. So hopefully this September, we're not sure yet, government guidelines, whether it will be European Heritage Day or whether it'll be another virtual one. But if anyone gets the chance to go to Grey Abbey, that herb garden is well worth a visit. And especially if the same man's there, he was so knowledgeable and he was highly entertained at the same time. But well worth a visit. This was taken on Monday evening and it doesn't really do this rosemary plant justice. It has survived the winter. You can see there's some lovely green stalks, but if we go on to the next slide, it'll really show you what it'll look like. That's what it should look like. Whenever I get a chance, I'll wait now to make sure there's no more frost, and then I'll cut that rosemary down a good bit and get these lovely fresh green shoots. Again, it's a perennial. You'll have it for a long, long time. And it's again one that you can use in lots and lots of different ways. It can be used, obviously everybody thinks of rosemary and lamb, but it'll go well with any meat, chicken, and even with fish. But my favourite recipe is to put it in a cake. And for any cake bakers tonight, it's a simple Madeira recipe. It's 8 ounces of everything, 8 ounces butter, sugar, flour, and a wee bit of milk, the great rind of a lemon, and 4 eggs. And the great thing about this recipe is you need about 1 to 2 teaspoons of rosemary, finely chopped, and you just put that in your mixer and mix the whole thing up. But it makes an absolute delicious cake, and it never fails. It always rises well, never disappoints, so it doesn't. But again, rosemary is one of those I think you want to have near your back door and keep picking at it, because it's one of those herbs which if you don't keep picking at it, it will become shrubby, and then it doesn't just be as flavoursome. Although I should say that if anyone who does have rosemary and you do have to cut it back, don't lose your stalks. Keep your stalks, especially if you're doing a barbecue and you're doing like a soft meat, like say a kebab, and you've got nice soft chicken. Use your rosemary stalk as a skewer. So put it through your meat or through your whatever you're putting on your skewer, and then put it in the barbecue, and you'll get the lovely flavour of rosemary coming through. And again, I forgot to say it, a lot of these herbs, especially the ones we're talking about in this group, the softer herbs, I do believe they must have come with the Romans. In fact, it would be the Romans who got the credit for bringing a lot of these herbs into Britain. Now, as far as I know, I need Owen here to tell me, but I'm sure, I don't think the Romans ever came to Ireland. So maybe they came up to that wee harbour in Downpatrick that we heard of the other night, and eventually then the use of herbs spread throughout Ireland. But definitely it was the Romans who brought it. You think of the Romans, they left a beautiful warm country of Italy. They were marched, or maybe forced marched, up through Europe into Britain, and then met this cold, wet climate. And I'm sure they were glad of some of these flavours of home in a cold and hospitable country. But we have a lot to thank the Romans for. Now we're coming on to the herbs now that maybe need a bit of care, and these are ones which are growing annually. This will be another favourite of mine, and it's basil. And I haven't sown any seed yet. I'm waiting till the temperatures increase. My greenhouse is a cold greenhouse, so I would give it another few weeks until I'm absolutely sure that it's nice and warm. Because the danger is if you sow it too soon, you get dampening off. And if you go out and you see your basil has turned brown, do not try to resurrect it. It'll never come back. Just put it on the compost heap, put a bit of fresh compost in, and start again. Because with any of these herbs, you know, they're so easily growing, and don't waste time. If something's not working, just have another go at it or try something different. But that's one of the problems with basil. And don't beat yourself up too much about it. If it's your first time growing basil and you find that they do go brown, just put them out and start all over again, because you'll find that probably in 2 weeks' time, the weather will have warmed up and you'll have a really good crop of basil. What I use is about a 12-inch pot, fill it just with ordinary compost and lightly covered, and then I just keep them in that pot the whole summer, but keep harvesting it. As you keep harvesting it, it will keep putting up more shoots. And again, don't try and grow just your ordinary basil, because you can get it obviously in all the supermarkets, but go for your lemon basils, your Thai basil, something that's different, that whenever we're allowed to friends back into our houses, you'll have something different to add to the table, and they'll say, well, what that is, and then you'll be able to tell them exactly what you're able to use it for. And if anyone's wondered what else you can use basil for, obviously we think of basil and tomatoes go well together. I'm going to give you a recipe here for basil soup. And the main ingredient for it is lentils. So you're putting in lentils, a chopped carrot, a large onion, and obviously your basil leaves, and streaky bacon, and 1 large tomato and 2 potatoes. So you just put that in the saucepan, bring it to the boil, and then simmer, and just until the whole thing's cooked, and then blitz it with a blender, and that does make a lovely soup. It's just something different to use with your basil. And the next one coming up is our coriander. Now, this is one of my favourite herbs. Now, not to grow for its green leaves, because I cannot understand why so many chefs on the television are always enthusiastic about coriander, and they're pulling these large bunches of coriander and they're putting them into this and putting them into that, because to me, it's a very bitter herb. But the one that I prefer is whenever it gets to the seed head stage. I love cooking with the fennel seeds. If you grow, as I said, coriander. If you grow coriander outside, it will grow to about at least 3 foot. It's a very tall herb, and you have to stake it. And then whenever you get it onto the seed stage, what I do is whenever the seeds get them past the green stage outside, and in a nice dry spell of weather, I just go along and cut off all the stems. All the leaves will have died back, and you'll have your nice seed heads. What I do is I just bring them into the kitchen and get a vase. Don't put any water into your vase, and just set your branches in, or your stems in, with the seed heads. And then whenever you find that they're nice and dry, take the seed heads off and put them into a jar, and you'll have them all winter. But coriander, that's a very easy one to grow. So it is. And again, I think it probably came from Italy. I'm sure the Romans are again going to be blamed for bringing that to Britain. Now, this is dill. It's not a very good photograph. It's slightly out of focus, and I apologise for that. That is not Aidan's fault. That was my bad photography. This again is another annual, so you sow it every year, and it would have a similar aniseedy flavour to the fennel, and the leaves would also feel similar, lovely soft textured leaves, and a very, very aniseedy flavour for cooking. Quite a strong flavour for the size of the plant. It really does have quite a good punch. But whenever I was reading up years ago, whenever we were going around doing the different cookery demonstrations, I learned that the Ulster Scots used this. It was more the women. Whenever we were going to church, obviously our sermons aren't as long as what they were years ago, but whenever I was going to church, in my handbag, I always would have had cinnamon sweets. And the youngsters, whenever they got a bit bored during the sermon, they would have said, "Mommy, any sweets?" And of course, before we went to church every Sunday, they would have said, "Have you got the church sweets?" And that was the cinnamons. But apparently, dill years ago, it puts up a lovely wee seed head, and the mothers would have collected the seed heads. And then on a Sunday morning, obviously, when you think back into the 17th, 18th century, it was such an effort to get to church. You either had to walk, or you went on the horse and trap. Even before the times of bicycles, it was an effort to go to church. And obviously the minister believed, well, he got you there, he was going to give you full measure, and sermons were a lot longer. And the mothers would have got wee packets of this dill seed out and handed it out to the children for them to suck during the sermon to keep them from getting bored. And it became known then as meeting seed. Obviously the Presbyterians call their churches the meeting house, and that's how that name came about. But again, for ordinary culinary purposes, an absolutely fantastic herb to grow, and an easy one as well. Perhaps you want to know where it's used for digestive problems, for liver ailments, for infections, and it can also help relax your muscles. So a good useful herb to have. And this is a sage. This is not, sorry, I'm getting them mixed up. This is a curry plant. Now I put this one in simply just for the fun of it. A curry plant, and it really does, whenever you take the stems or the leaves off it, it really does taste like curry. And you can, the plant is edible, and you can put it into dishes that you're cooking for a curry. It wouldn't substitute totally all your other spices for making curry, but it certainly does add to it. But again, I have to put a disclaimer on this. There is another popular herbaceous plant which looks very similar, and it is yellow flowers. So again, if you're buying a curry plant, please do make sure that you've got the correct label and it is edible. Always check that all these plants that you're bringing home to eat as herbs, that they are edible and it's not a look-alike substitute. I'm just putting that wee disclaimer in again. And I'm just going to add on to this point. I didn't, and I really, sorry I didn't do it. I didn't put a picture in of borage. Borage is a real native of Ireland, so it is, and it's also an annual. It comes up every year, and whenever it comes up, it has beautiful blue and purple flowers, absolutely like wee stars. But it's a very, very tall plant, very, very strong plant. And again, I sowed mine about, I'm sure, about 6 years ago, and I've never had to sow it since. What happens is it self-seeds. And at this time of year, I don't see any borage, and I probably have my whole vegetable plot dug over and probably planted by the time the borage seeds will come up through. Now, it depends where they are. I like them to grow where they sort of self-seed because they're not easy to transplant. But if they're going to be somewhere, say in a bed of lettuce, you don't want a 3-foot big borage plant because it does spread out. It has very, very strong. There we are. Somebody is brilliant at. Thank you very much, Aidan, for doing that, because I was so disappointed that I hadn't put a photograph in of this beautiful herb. And even if no one is interested in growing it as a herb, it's a beautiful herbaceous flower, just to have it for the flowers, for flower arranging. It is just a super all-rounder. Again, no bother, because mine has self-seeded over the last 6 years, never had to buy seed. And if it does end up somewhere that I don't want to, say in a bed of lettuce, then I do have to move it. And it can be moved if you give it a real good watering, but it has a long tape root and it doesn't really like you moving it. But I tried, if it sort of seeds somewhere where I can manage it then, because you do have to stake it, because out of the main stem will come about 3 or 4 really big, strong side stems. And it's a very jaggy plant. I know it's got this beautiful, delicate flower. The stems are very rough and the leaves would be very, very rough on it. But it does have a sweet flavour. And if you're wondering what it does taste like, if you ever get round to tasting it, it's like a cucumber taste. So it's quite a nice, fresh taste with it. And you can use the flowers in your salads. That's mainly what I would use it for. And if anyone's used doing pims or alcoholic drinks, you can also use it to that as well. And it's also a great pollinator in your garden, and it encourages butterflies and bees, obviously. And it's good to have for if you're growing vegetables or if you've got apple trees to get them pollinated. But even just for its own beauty, I think it's just a real star, so it is. And thank you very much, Aidan. You really made my evening, because I was so disappointed that I hadn't added a picture in. But thank you very much for doing that. But it also says here that you're not to consume it in large amounts. Well, what do we say about this boy? Everybody has him, and he'll come up everywhere. And there you can see on Monday evening, there he is starting to come up in my own plot. Now, nettles, I think, are underrated, because they're a total native to Northern Ireland, or to Ireland, I should say. They're found everywhere. And we're also told that during the famine times, that the nettles were one of the reasons why some families survived. Now, I remember whenever I was at school, we learned the phrase, "carry cows, no Sunday." And at the start, and being naive, I thought, well, that must be County Kerry. County Kerry got it really hit by the famine. The cows down in County Kerry, no, this Sunday. But then I learned then it was the actual breed of cow, that the Kerry cows got bled on a Sunday. And that blood then was given, the father of the family would have given it to his children to try and give them some nourishment. And we're told that the nettles also became a really important source of nutrient through the famine times. And what they would have done is they would have gathered the nettles, they would have brought them in, and whenever they were making their porridge or their wheat or oats, they would have boiled the nettles in with it to give them extra nourishment. And of course, we also know that the nettles are good for making soup with. And I also belong to a walking group, and one night we're out walking and we came past quite a clump of nettles. And one of the men, who had been quite elderly at that time, was reminiscing that his mother would have gone out and gathered nettles, and she would have added into champ. Now, I never had heard tell of that before. I always thought you had to have scallions or chives for champ, but he said that his mother had gone and used nettles for that. And obviously she knew that they were high in nutrients and would be of benefit to the family. And again, what else can we say about the nettle? I suppose I'm going to say that if you are going to pick them, always pick them up above dog level. That's another, because you want to make sure they're not contaminated in any way. But certainly they are one of the highly nutrient, I don't know how you call them, a herb or they're definitely native, but I'm going to call them a herb tonight, because they can be used in so many different ways. And we're told it's good for purifying blood, can be used as a hair tonic, for vitamin C, A, and for vitamin K. And again, it reduces inflammation and high blood pressure. And if anyone had read last week's Ireland's Own, they would have seen a full page on the nettle. And it was told in that, and it was done by Eugene Daly. He said that nettles could be made into a cloth. Again, that was something new, but if you've got the copy of Ireland's Own, I think it was last week's, it tells you how that was done. And I'm just going to read a wee bit out of the article by Eugene because I can't rephrase this any better than what he has done. Nettles also have a place in ancient Celtic folklore and were believed to indicate the living place of fairies. And I honestly believe there's fairies. If anyone tries to tell me there wasn't or isn't fairies in Ireland, I would certainly debate strongly with them on that point. And their stings protected one from witchcraft. And the 17th century herbalist and apothecary Nicholas Culpeper is reputed to have said, nettles may be found by feeling for them in the darkest night. So obviously you'd soon get stung if you come across your nettles. So I think that they're well worth a mention tonight. Now, why did you include the gooseberry? Well, we're thinking of traditions and heritage, and nearly every farm and a lot of gardens, even as you go through the countryside, what we would have called labourers' cottages, they always would have had a good garden to the back of them, and that was for them so that they could sustain themselves and grow their own food. And I've always wanted to have a gooseberry patch, and I never did. And I even talked about it at the close, didn't we, David, about introducing gooseberries, and it never happened. And at home, I tried to find space for them, but there was never, I only had my vegetable plot and I didn't want to really put gooseberries in there. But last year, there was farm work going on and there was a bit of space. And I said to the men, I said, well, what are you doing with that wee bit of space there? Because I thought I could make use of it. And they said, well, if you want it, you can have it. Now, I'm not sure whether it's going to be ideal or not. I did plant gooseberry bushes. I think I planted 8. And I did have a look at them the other day, and there is wee green shoots coming on them, but whether it's sheltered enough or not. But I thought it would just be nice to introduce the gooseberries onto the farm again, because, you know, for centuries, that is one of the things that farms would have had. They always had like apple trees was always one of the things they had, and there was always gooseberry trees. And in fact, on some of our farms down home, on the laneways, for some reason, people would have planted gooseberries. And I suppose it was just making use of extra ground. In the summertime, my daughter and I, we went for a walking few days in the Sperrins, and we were coming, we'd done Huddy's Way. If anyone's familiar with that particular walk, it does bring you down through a derelict farmyard. And it was a total surprise. We came down through beautiful old remains of a cottage or farmhouse, and there was 2 damson trees. And this shows the difference. I knew right away those were damson trees, and there was absolutely loaded with damson fruit. But our daughter, who would be in her 30s, said to me, Mum, what are those? And I goes, you don't know what those are? She says, no, never saw them before. I says, those are damsons. So we sat down and had our lunch, and we had a beautiful dessert of fresh damsons pulled off the tree. And I was saying to her, you know, I do remember on one of the farms down home that in the hedgerow there was damson trees growing. So I think that's something maybe in Mourne that we need to introduce a wee bit more of, and bring back what we can use every day, because obviously that provided a source of nutrients for the housewife in the autumn time, and coming into the winter, she would have made damson jam out of it. But I thought it was lovely that out of that whole farmyard, although it was totally in ruins and the lane was overgrown, that the damson trees were in absolute full.
It survived.
Yes, they had, yes. And we're coming on to our last slide. Now, this was last year. If you saw my rhubarb patch now at the minute, you would cry, because it's absolutely full of weeds. But you can see on the right-hand side where I had started the herb patch, where I'd taken out all the nettles and mint. But I included rhubarb just because tonight we're talking about the heritage of herbs and the heritage of growing things. And I think, again, every farm would have had a rhubarb patch, because, again, it was a way of providing food for the house. It's easy growing, it loves our climate, And as you can see, all I've done is dug it over, and then I just put a top dressing on there of straw, just to try and keep the weeds down over the summer and keep the moisture in. And I think at Hannah's Close, we hope to reinstate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we hope to bring, we're definitely going to gooseberries and rhubarb, hopefully within the next year. And I think that's all I have to say tonight. Aidan, I would just like to thank you before we do go for all your hard work for putting the slides together for us tonight, and for fighting the borage. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Lily. And thanks very much for the talk. It's fascinating to see. I had no idea there were so many herbs, to be honest. And it's interesting to see that some of them have come from further afield as well. There's a few questions, I think, on the chat. You maybe answered one, but is three-cornered leek a part of the wild garlic family? That's a question from Tracy.
I'm assuming it is, yes, because it tastes the same. It has the same similar root. Yes, it would be the same family. But the three-cornered leek, it is so invasive. It is unreal how quick that herb spreads. And unless you're going to keep it really contained, it would take over. It's so much more vigorous than what the even the wild garlic would be. It's not one really to be recommended.
And a question from Roy there: which herbs grow well beside the shoreline? I
would say fennel, because it's a good tough herb, so it is. So I would recommend, and plus there's got a good deep root. So that's the one that I would go for. Yeah.
All right. A question from Andy Hall there. Typical Andy, always thinking about some alcohol beverage at the weekend. If you were making mojitos and used sage instead of mint, would that help with cholesterol?
It probably would, for it seems really well. I would say yes.
You give it a go, Andy.
Yes.
Give it a go.
You might die trying, but sure, give her a life anyway.
Yeah, everybody likes a trier.
So Tracy, what's Tracy said there? Love dams and jam, but sloes were hard to find this year.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's
I'm not sure
a
what
typo or.
I'm not sure about the slow harvest.
Okay. And Florence has said sweet Sicily, aniseed flavour, good for puddings.
Yes.
Have you used that before, Lily? Have you?
I haven't. No, that's sweet Sicily is one of the ones that I don't have. One of the ones that I did have, and I don't have it grown at the minute, is Angelica. But if anybody wants to see Angelica, they have to go to Donegal. And what's the name of the castle in the middle of Donegal? It's a national park, Glenveigh. Glenveigh Castle, and go to their vegetable garden. And they have the most beautifulest Angelica grown. And Angelica, it can be used as a sweetener. If you're doing rhubarb tarts and you want to cut your sugar levels down, then you can use Angelica. But also, it's obviously used then as crystallized as decoration for doing cakes.
Very good, very good. That's all the questions in the chat at the minute. Does anybody else have any questions for Lily? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want.
Lavender, can I ask about lavender? It can be harmful for blood pressure, can't it?
Yes, I think lavender, I wouldn't even class lavender as a herb.
No.
I
remember it was planted down the Danelong in that wonderful garden about 30 years ago beside the old mill.
Yes.
And it seemed to do very well there. That was a scheme for young people to learn about things, works. But
yes,
yeah.
I remember that garden, so I do, and it was a lovely sheltered spot, and it's a pity that they didn't keep it up, but obviously the council maybe didn't have the resources to keep it going, but it was an absolutely super place to have it. It was right beside the walkway down to the sea, and was beside the corn mill. Yes.
Yes, beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, if there's no more questions, guys.
Hello.
Yeah.
It's Frank here. Lily, I really enjoyed your walk and talk. It brought me back great memories in the granny and sort of bed baking and all the smells of the old kitchen's fantastic. I would cook a fish pie from time to time. I would use spinach as a flavouring. And you sort of answered my question, the marjoram, which I would never have thought. What else could you add to fish pie without killing it or over killing it?
Thyme also goes well with fish. And if you're using a strong fish like mackerel, fennel can do really well because it has a strong flavour as well. So it has, but either thyme, marjoram, oregano, any of those Mediterranean sort of type herbs are really good. But with the stronger flavoured fish, then I would go for fennel.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, guys, I think we'll maybe close it there.
Sorry,
Lily?
I was
Oh,
going,
yes, Florence.
sorry, I was going to ask, isn't fennel a good antidote if you're cooking cauliflower and stinky sort of vegetables? I have heard that if you put a bit of fennel in, it takes that rank smell out.
Well, now I have cauliflower in the house, and I'm going to try that tomorrow evening because cauliflower does have
yes, a very rank smell.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, a cousin told me that she used fennel for that reason. So
Yes.
you could try it anyway.
Absolutely, yes. It sounds worth
I
doing.
really thoroughly enjoyed your talk. My grandmother came from Leitrim near Castlewellan, and she brought up a family of 10 by using a lot of the herbs, and every one of them, the youngest to die was 70, but that was a hard thing, but they all reached their 90s nearly.
Oh, there's hope for me then.
Yeah. So, and she was very good with her herbs.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. Wonderful.
Brilliant. Lots of thanks coming through on the chat there, Lily, as well. Everybody's appreciated and enjoyed the talk. One last chance for any questions. No. Okay. Well, we'll close it there. Lily, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming along, and thanks David for supporting Lily there. Just to remind you, that's the end of this week's talks, but we've 2 more to finish things off next Wednesday and Thursday. Owen Halpin's coming back to give us a talk on Into the Great Unknown, the Archaeology of Death. And our very own Roy there on the call is coming back to give us a talk on the history of Kilkeel on Thursday evening. So anybody interested in that, please feel free to join us. So thanks very much, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
No.